Welcome to the Present podcast, where we talk about things that are present, real, relevant, and rich. And today we are diving deep into the newest series, In the Image of God, created to be like God. That's the underline, the phrase, the epic title that we want to get into. And I really can't wait to share some of these concepts with you guys, because I believe this is the highest ideal to which we are called. This is the highest calling of all, to reflect God. And it's such a beautiful idea and a theme that when embraced would change the way you live. And this has not only affected my conception, my mind, the way I think, but it has also affected the way I live. Life now makes much more sense than when I never had this concept embodied into my life. And I can't wait to share and break the bits and pieces of this message to get into the very heart of it. But before we go there, though, we do need to take some things out of the way so that when we reach that stage, everything will make perfect sense. All right, and so I'm just going to do a quick recap of the concept, the basic preliminary point of this series, which is that we can only truly be human. We can only truly experience humanity. We can only truly be human in the context of God, where God is the creator and we are the creatures or the creation. And if the creation decides that it no longer needs the creator, obviously there is dissonance right there. And the creation is going to suffer a couple of problems, the chief one being identity crisis. And we're going to look into some of these concepts today. And so stay right in. If you need to just take a break, this is your time to prepare to drink some water and just come into this discussion with some power, livelihood, and you know what I mean, with your attention all good and all fresh. All right, see you in a minute. All right, so I did mention that, for us to truly be human, it needs to be in the context of God, because God is the inventor of the idea of being human in the first place. Now, that is not to say that if you do not believe in God, you are less human. No, that's not the case. All I'm simply saying is that if you believe in God, you have a better conception of what it means to be human. You have the fullest access to your purpose, your destiny, why you are here, deeper questions that science cannot answer on its own. And I love to use examples and analogies, and I think I did use this analogy in the previous episode, but I'm going to use it on a deeper and a broader scale here today. And that is the example of a computer. So I'm just going to elaborate what happens when creation decides to separate from God. So if you think of a computer, let's say the Apple computer, because Apple is the fastest or the biggest computer company in the world as of now, at least the one that's growing enough or too much or much revenue per year. So let's say Apple. So let's take the MacBook Pro. So think of a MacBook Pro. Would a MacBook Pro be fully functional if it decided to have no affiliation with the company itself whatsoever? Well, first of all, it will lose identity. Okay, think of it as if MacBook Pro for some reasons decides to remove that Apple sign or logo, that almost half Apple sign, half eaten Apple. I don't know why it's eaten. Anyways, that's another thing. But if the MacBook Pro rather decides to do that, then it loses its identity. Okay, so that's the first thing. It becomes unrecognizable in the multitude of many computer companies. Secondly, if the computer is somewhere disconnected or somehow disconnected from the system online, from the supercomputers that connect everything, it would not be able to update the software, and consequently, the Mac would be susceptible to virus attacks and other breakdowns or insecurities. So if you look at the computer, the form will still be the same. The touch, the feel, the texture will still be the same. You open it, has the same parts, the screen, the hardware, the motherboard, and all these parts, the monitor, they'll still be the same, but the operating system will be faulty. And I think the same thing applies to us human beings in relationship to God. We need God for identity. We need God for purpose and for deeper communion and, that fellowship of belonging. Now, whenever we want to separate ourselves from Him, we suffer the same thing that a MacBook Pro would suffer had it chosen, or had someone chosen to, disassemble, rearrange, and just disconnected from the entire system. That's the same thing that would happen to us. Now, I love the examples of computers because it is arguably the complex system we have managed to create so far. It is the complex system that we have managed to create so far. Yet, even the computer itself cannot come close to the immense processing power of the brain. I mean, when you compare even the fastest computer in the world today with the brain still wins because we created that computer. So if the brain created the computer, then the brain has to be in some way superior to the computer. And we're not talking about can a person now be able to do the numbers, the mathematics, and all these things. There are many ways we can compare the brain, like its processing power. And I'm just going to give you an example here. So, John Starton at Science ABC says, although it is impossible to precisely calculate, it is postulated that the human brain operates at 1 exaflop or exaflop, which is equivalent to a billion calculations per second. This is in 2014. Now, in 2014, some clever researchers in Japan tried to match the processing power in 1 second from 1% of the brain. That doesn't sound like very much. And yet it took the 4th fastest supercomputer in the world, the K computer, 40 minutes to crunch the calculations for a single second of brain activity. It took 40 minutes for the 4th fastest supercomputer at that time in 2014 to crunch the calculations for a single second of brain activity. That is mind-boggling. That is so interesting. And that should just tell us of the complexity of the brain. And just looking at the complexity of the brain, a person needs to realize and appreciate that there is a higher intelligence than us. And I don't mean aliens. I mean God Himself. What brings a problem is when we start to think of God as a system and as a concept and as a theory and as a hypothesis. No, God is a person. By definition, religion, or simply the belief in a supreme being, is a perfect thing. But functionally, in the way that it has been carried, or that in the way that it is being carried out right now, it is not. Religion, especially man-made religion, has created so much tension, so many conflicts and confusion than any other thing. And so we see God everywhere. But is He really functionally active and present? I mean, I know 50% or at least half the population believes that there is a God, but does God really live in them? Because it's one thing to say God exists, God lives, and it's another thing does he exist in your heart? I had this saying, yes, God exists, but does he exist in your heart? Because that's the most important thing. Why do we see all this tension, all this conflict? And so it seems to me that the prevalence of God does not necessarily mean the relevance of God, in a sense that just because you go to church, just because you have this conception that there is a God, does not mean that he is necessarily reflected in you. And it's high time we put away our, dearest convictions that we want to put to the forefront at the exclusion of the image of God. The problem is that we see more and more that religion as we know it mostly expresses itself as trying to institutionalize God. But God is not an institution. God is a person. You have to relate to God as a person, as a father, not as a system. God is not, as many would have it, this exact ruler who is looking down at who makes some mistakes and ever waiting to throw them into hellfire. No, that's not who God is. Contrary to that toxic misconception, John, one of the dearest followers of God, submits to us that God is love. And we see this throughout how God has dealt with men throughout the past. Even in my own life, I can submit to you guys that God is love. And so when we say we are created in the image of God, we should remember that God is love. We need to readdress what we believe. A religious conviction that would lead another person into immorality, hatred, carelessness, brutality, and violence, that cannot be truly of God. And no matter how badly the person believes in such a concept, a theory, a doctrine, it is purely satanic and does not reflect the image of God at all. It's satanic, and people think when I say satanic, it means a person has to be part of the Illuminati or something. No, satanic simply means that which is not of God. So in conclusion, I felt I had to speak about this because a lot of us think that just because we know about God, that means we know him. But no, we don't. God is the only one who can reveal himself to us. And for those who need proof for the existence of God, we will get there. But first things first, God is love. And without that love, as humanity, we cannot continue. We are going to self-destruct. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys in these few 10 minutes. And I hope that will, just give us a good foundation for the entire series. And the next episode, I will be speaking. Now I'm moving from this introductory mode. I will go straight into the heart of the message, with the first one being, let there be light. That's the first thing God created. God created light. What does light mean? How can we reflect and reproduce that in our lives? And it's going to be so amazing, especially just looking at the scientific, just the physical reality of the light, of how it exists as a wave, and how it's also it's a wave, and also it's a photon. It has this dual nature. It's such a complex scientific realization that would affect our spiritual understanding of the concept. And I hope that you guys will be there as we will be dealing with that as well. And so thank you so much for tuning in on the Present Podcast. See you on the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye for now.